Welcome to the City Club of Eugene's April 14th, 2023 program, Measure 2340, Renewal of Jail and Youth Services Levy. This is the 26th program of our 2022-2023 programming year. My name is Karin Knutson, and I am City Club's president. The City Club of Eugene comes to you live today, sunny, beautiful Friday from the 5th Street Market District in the heart of downtown Eugene. Welcome to today's moderator, KLCC News Director Chris Lehman, and to our speakers, Sheriff Cliff Harold and Jacob True of Healing Not Handcuffs, as well as to all of City Club's members and everyone who is here with us and listening. It is a pleasure to have you here with us for this important community conversation. For almost 30 years, the City Club of Eugene has remained committed to its mission to build community vision through open inquiry by providing weekly programs that offer the opportunity for community members to learn together, discuss important issues, and consider differing viewpoints. Through their participation, City Club members and speakers model respectful and curious civic engagement, which we hope informs and empowers our community to better engage with the important and sometimes difficult work that is before us. We believe now more than ever that this open exchange of ideas and information is critical to the future and health of this community and to all communities. We create the space for civil dialogue around civic issues, and we invite you to join us every week to hear directly about local, national, and international issues with thought leaders and experts. Of course, we cannot do this work without your help and without the support of City Club's business and in-kind sponsors. A special thank you to City Club's Diamond sponsors. Kaiser Permanente exists to provide high-quality, affordable healthcare services and to improve the health of our members and the communities that we serve. You can learn more information at kp.org. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians to question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. You can find more information at uoregon.edu. Peace Health has been proud to serve Eugene, Lane County, and beyond as your hometown healthcare partner for more than 80 years. The Peace Health mission is to keep you and your family healthy, and you can learn more at peacehealth.org. And Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. And you can learn more at lanecc.edu. Thank you also to the City of Eugene and to Lane County for their support. Thank you as well to today's Sapphire sponsor, AARP. AARP is dedicated to empowering people aged 50 plus and to keeping Oregonians informed, engaged, and active. And you can learn more at states.aarp.org/Oregon. Thank you also to today's gold sponsors, Sacred Earth Botanicals and Ferguson and Fife Dentistry. If you are with us for the first time today or a long-time listener or attendee of City Club programs, I also invite you to support our work weekly by becoming a member at the cityclubofeugene.org. We invite everyone to participate in these community conversations to help us to find out what we need to be spending more time talking about, and we hope you will join us in that work. And now to introduce today's program. This May, Lane County voters will choose whether to renew the existing jail and youth services levy. Lane County reports that the funds from this levy help maintain 255 jail beds, 8 youth detention beds, and 8 youth treatment beds, and make up 52% of the total revenue that funds jail operations and 78% of the cost of mental health services provided within the jail. Today, we will hear from perspectives that support and oppose the renewal of the levy. Lane County Sheriff Cliff Harold will represent support for renewal, and Healing Not Handcuffs Coalition Treasurer Jacob True will represent opposition to the renewal. Welcome, Jacob and Cliff. We appreciate you both being here today. City Club is also delighted to welcome KLCC News Director Chris Lehman as our guest moderator. Chris Lehman has an accomplished communications professional with more than 25 years of experience in journalism. He joined KLCC in December of 2018 and currently is their news director. Thank you for being with us today as guest moderator. Chris, welcome to the City Club of Eugene.
Thank you, Karin. We're going to first hear from both of our speakers today. They'll have about 10 minutes to give us an opening statement outlining their position and perspective on this issue. And then we'll move into a time of questions, some of which have been submitted in advance, some of which I wrote up, and some of which may come in as comments in our live streams today. So looking forward to that. We'll start first with an opening statement from Sheriff Harold, and then we'll move into Jacob True's opening statement directly after that.
All right, well, thank you all very much. Appreciate the opportunity for being here and getting to have this conversation with you all. It's an important conversation to have, and I'll just say that I appreciate that you all are folks who are engaged in your community and engaged in wanting to know what's going on with your community. I heard that this is your 26th City Club. This is my 26th community presentation on Measure 2340, so that works out well. You know, I want to mention that we're here on two sides of an issue, but in a lot of ways, I don't necessarily see this as an either or, but a both. Jacob and I have agreed on some things, for example, that we need to provide better services for mobile crisis response and mental health services in our community and in our state, and there's no disagreement in that. However, at the same time, we must provide the basic components of a public safety system for our community. I think there may be a misperception in some areas that the jail is mostly holding people who have been arrested for minor infractions like trespassing or disorderly conduct. And that's just not the case at the Lane County Jail. So I want to share with you a little bit about who is in the Lane County Jail. I get an email every day at 11 a.m. That outlines categories of folks that are in custody. So at 11 a.m. earlier today, our occupancy was 291 individuals. There were 16 individuals that are in custody for charges of murder. There are 68 people in custody for charges of Measure 11. You may all remember that Measure 11 was the mid-90s citizen petition for mandatory minimum sentences on serious violent felonies. So an example of Measure 11 crimes, assault 1 and 2, rape 1 and 2, sex abuse, robbery, are incorporated in Measure 11. They're the most serious of the violent felonies. So 68 for Measure 11 felonies, and then 37 folks were in custody for violent felonies outside of Measure 11. As an example of that, rape 1 is a Measure 11 crime. However, attempted rape 1 is not incorporated in Measure 11, so that would be a serious violent felony outside of Measure 11. 37 violent felony offenders, and then 25 that are in custody for violent misdemeanors. Now, without going through those case by case, I can almost guarantee you that those are domestic violence assaults. Domestic violence assault typically starts out at a misdemeanor level, and then there's a number of factors that can cause that to be a felony. So if those factors were met, then that would move it into the violent felony category. But these 25 violent misdemeanor offenders were in custody at 11 a.m. Are most likely all domestic violence assaults. We have a handful of other categories. For example, we have 43 folks in custody that are sentenced offenders, so they were sentenced to local jail time. We have 17 folks in custody that's in our other excluded silo. An example of that is somebody who is serving a prison sentence in the state prison system, and then they have business with the Lane County Circuit Court. And so they're transported to our jail to conduct their business at the Lane County Court, and they're in our custody, so we have to have a room for them. So there's 17 folks in that silo. That's an example. That's not an exclusive list, but that's who's in your jail today at 11 a.m. Measure 2340 is asking voters to renew the public safety levy, which has been in effect now for 10 years, at the same rate, 55 cents per thousand. It's not seeking an increase. It's asking the community to maintain the current level of service that we're providing. The levy promises is 255 jail beds in the adult jail, 8 beds, as you heard, 8 detention beds in youth services, which is 50% of their beds, and 8 treatment beds, which is slightly better than 50% of their treatment beds. It provides 35% of the funding, the operational funding for youth services. The levy was initially designed with a lot of community input to then Sheriff Tom Turner. It passed in 2013. It was renewed in 2017 with just shy of 73% of the vote. Each of the levy has been in effect. There's been an external independent auditor who has confirmed that in fact the funds are being used the way the voters were told they would be used. And that's presented to the Board of County Commissioners and the elected sheriff in a public meeting annually. Because this funding is approved by the voters for a very specific purpose, and because there are safety walls on the funding that we want to confirm to the voters it's being used the way we said it would be, if this funding isn't approved, it's important to know that doesn't mean there are funds that can be applied to other purposes. There's just not the funds in the budget at all. Not only will this decimate the sheriff's office as it did in previous seasons, 08 to 12, but it has the potential to impact other county delivery of other county services as well, as the commissioners would have to have a conversation about how to reconfigure and prioritize the limited general fund budget. So in Oregon, there's 36 counties. Every county is required to have a sheriff. Every county is required to have a jail. The circuit courts are served by the county jail, and felony charges have to go through circuit courts. Municipal courts and municipal jails can only deal with misdemeanor offenses, and even then, some misdemeanor offenses must go through the circuit court and at the county jail. Lane County historically was able to provide adequate services back a few decades ago with timber receipts. So when trees were logged off of federal lands, were 54% federal forest land, the county government received some of those funds. Subsequent to logging being reduced on federal lands, the federal government was sending payments called Secure Rural Schools payments to try to replace that revenue that local governments were missing. However, those funding options have largely dried up as well. So the loss of that funding represents more than $40 million each year to the county budget. Before the levy passed the first time from 08 to 12, all of Lane County government had a reduction in services. The impact of the sheriff's office, we laid off 100 people and we reduced our jail down to just 125 jail beds. This required that we capacity-based release or force release individuals, including individuals for Measure 11 and violent felony offenses. Now, this is different than a court-structured pretrial release. Court-structured pretrial release has connectivity to the individual. A judge or somebody in pretrial services who works with the authority of a judge might have a third party come and sign and say, yeah, I'll make sure my friend stays plugged in and goes to court. Or they might tell the person, we're going to release you pretrial, but you need to call once a week and confirm you're going to stay plugged in. Or we want you to show up at our window once a week and confirm that you're going to stay plugged in. A capacity-based release happens when the courts have said, hey, sheriff, hang on to this person, but we don't have a room, and so we're forced to release them to the street. And that doesn't maintain any of that connectivity that a court-structured release has. I will mention that in 2012, at the height of the crisis, really, when we had only 125 beds, the Public Safety Coordinating Council, every county has one. There are all of the aspects of the public safety system seated at the table. There's the sheriff and the DA, there's police chiefs, there's the county mental health director, the county public health director, the director of Lane County Public Defender Services, reentry services represented by Paul Solomon from sponsors, the circuit courts are present. So it's a robust conversation to talk about the system as a whole. And the entire system identified the jail as the #1 priority to be fixed so that the system could work. Even the defense attorneys, they weren't ever having the opportunity to meet a client when we only had 125 beds. Someone might get arrested for burglary, the courts would assign them a lawyer, but because they were right back out on the street, they were oftentimes continuing down a bad path. And so by the time we actually got somebody into court, they maybe accumulated 8 burglaries instead of 1. So rather than being able to redirect them down a better path earlier on, we were allowing them to get much farther down a negative path. I am proud of what I say I inherited a legacy from those who went before me on thinking strategically about our work. And I don't think that the Lane County Sheriff's Office has demonstrated this idea that we're just going to always do things the way we always have. So one example of that is our wellness program in the Lane County Jail. It really is a specific investment in mental health. We have 5 mental health specialists working within the Lane County Jail. That's more than any other county jail in the state. And what we have done is we have said, rather than the traditional approach of you displayed bad behavior, so you're going to stay locked in your cell longer. When your behavior improves, we'll bring you out and give you more access to things. this program says, we're going to bring you out, get you plugged into a program with some other folks and a mental health specialist, and see if your behavior improves. And we've absolutely seen some benefit from that. We've had some national recognition from this program. We presented in Denver last year, and maybe during the Q&A we'll get time to talk more about that. With that, I'm, again, really appreciative that we get to be here to have the conversation, and I'm looking forward to more.
All righty. Thank you. Thank you to the City Club of Eugene for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jacob True. I'm an organizer with the Healing, Not Handcuffs campaign. We are a coalition that includes SURGE, the Springfield Eugene Showing Up for Racial Justice, and the Eugene Springfield chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. I'm an accountant, University of Oregon graduate, and have 2 kids in school. I live in Eugene. What do we stand for? We want a community where everyone has their basic needs met, where everyone has access to housing, where everyone has the health care that they need, including mental health care. We oppose Measure 2340 because we support a vision for what Lane County could be without putting $22 million of levy funds annually towards jail and youth detention. Locking more of our citizens in jail does not make us safer. Locking people up further destabilizes them and their families by cutting them off from work, school, and community. To be clear, a no on the jail levy is only one step. The next step beyond that is to fund crucial services that efficiently provide true public safety, such as mental health crisis centers, addiction treatment centers, outpatient community mental health services, as well as investing in affordable housing. We do not need to lock in $22 million of spending each year for the next 5 years on a system that just doesn't work well. Research has shown for decades that putting more people in prison or in jails does not reduce crime. The appeal of just lock them all up is neither morally nor fiscally responsible. It's a reassuring fairy tale of good guys locking away bad guys forever that only offers the illusion of safety. The reality is that imprisoning someone has no measurable effect on whether they will commit another crime, and it does not serve as an effective deterrent for others to commit crimes. I'll be blunt. America has 3% of the world's population, but 25% of the jail and prison population. At that, are we the safest country in the world? No. True community safety starts with making sure that the basic needs of our community members are met. Housing and mental health care are the greatest unmet public safety needs in our community right now. So why are people in jail? A good portion of the folks in jail are there because of poverty, homelessness, and mental illness have been criminalized. And folks who, if they had the mental health support that they needed, likely would not have engaged in the behavior that got them into jail in the first place. Over 80% of the folks in Lane County Jail have not been convicted of a crime. I'll say that again. 80% of the people currently in our local jail are pre-trial and have not been convicted of the crimes they're being charged with. The current criminalization approach is counterproductive in that it perpetuates cycles of poverty, homelessness, and mental illness. This decreases community safety for everyone. Jailing people does nothing to address those underlying community problems, so when folks are released, their underlying conditions persist, and folks are likely to be rearrested for the same thing. Our current system of criminalization and incarceration makes their and our problems worse. Not only is it ineffective, it's expensive. Studies have shown that it's much cheaper to give people full housing and health services than it is to pay for incarceration, adjudication, and mental costs of the unhoused. Significant savings with taxpayer dollars could be had if money currently spent on enforcing laws that criminalize poverty and homelessness was redirected towards low-barrier affordable housing and health care, especially mental health care. Let's get specific. In fiscal year 21 to 22, Lane County budgeted $36 million for the jail, which doesn't include court and arrest costs. That's just for the physical incarceration itself. With 260 people in jail on average during that period, it's gone up a little since then, that comes to about $11,500 per person per month. Say that again. The county spends $11,500 per person in the jail every month. For that cost, how many people in jail could have had health care, full room and board, before the incident that led them to being put in jail? The response to COVID and the need to reduce beds in use then shows that alternative procedures to locking somebody up before their court date, such as supervised release, makes fiscal and social sense. I'll be blunt. A person sitting in jail isn't taking their kids to school or working a job. They aren't going to school themselves or helping their family members. They're just locked into jail. Further, maintaining a large number of jail beds under this jail levy just doesn't make sense, especially considering the changes made to cash bail last year and the reduced number of folks arrested for petty drug offenses with the passage of Measure 111. Currently, the biggest mental health providers in the country are jails and prisons, and Lane County is no exception. One of the talking points of the passing the levy side is that jails are where the county can provide mental health treatment. The sheriff has just touted the wellness program of the county jail as stabilizing and managing the behavior of mentally ill folks. But in previous speeches, the sheriff admits that those folks often come back after being released with the same mental health issues and with the same behavior that needs to be stabilized and managed again. Let's talk about who's providing those mental health services in the jail. The jail hires out their inmate services to a little business called WellPath. WellPath is the largest for-profit corporation that works in U.S. jails and is based out of Tennessee. WellPath is currently facing 4 wrongful death cases in federal court in Oregon. Last year, WellPath's former CEO, Jerry Boyle, was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison after engaging in a bribery scheme with the sheriff of Norfolk County, Virginia. A vote for the jail levy is a vote for tax dollars going out of our state to a for-profit corporation in Tennessee. Instead of paying WellPath for inmate services, our taxes should go directly to local agencies that provide mental and behavioral health services, housing, jobs, and basic needs for our community. In previous talks, the sheriff has also mentioned that the county has had a hard time hiring people directly to work providing mental health treatment in jail. The reason why is simple. Jails are not a place to get well. Just like they say, you don't get well in a cell. Jails are not a place where people who care about their patients want to work. Spoken a lot on why jails are the wrong place to get mental health treatment. Don't make us safer and perpetuate the cycle of poverty. So what should we do instead? We should promote public safety by funding mental health treatment in the community, both at mental health crisis centers and for long-term chronic issue management. A mental health crisis center, like the future Lane County Stabilization Center, is a much better place to help folks get well. Inpatient and outpatient mental health services would do so much more to promote community safety than continuing this elevated level of jail funding. We should fund supportive housing for unhoused folks, like the MLK Commons, so they aren't stuck getting cycled in and out of the legal system while their basic needs are unmet and unaddressed. Again, crime would be reduced and public safety and wellness would be greatly improved if people's basic needs are met. Punishment for violence may be cathartic for some, but wouldn't it be better if the harm hadn't happened in the first place? We could also use restorative justice and other alternatives to hold people accountable for their actions. And we also make it clear that if the levy was not passed by the voters, the jail would remain open. The levy only provides 52% of jail operations funding. There would still be a place for people who have caused harm to others through violence. There would still be a fully funded place for people who have caused harm to others through violence. Not passing the jail levy would more likely increase the reliance on cheaper pretrial alternatives such as supervised release. Jail levy supporters talk about capacity-based release, forced release, like it puts predators on the street. But every example brought up from before the jail levy is of someone who did not reoffend and returned for their court appointment. One example used by the levy supporters on their website was a teenager who used his capacity-based release to finish high school. He was ultimately not sentenced to jail time and has not reoffended in the intervening 10 years. Would we really be safer if he'd been kept in jail and prevented from finishing his education? Or would he be unemployable, homeless, and back in jail? In reality, capacity-based release would affect individuals charged with minor crimes, including mentally ill and homeless individuals. A significant amount of bed space in the jail is used for mentally ill defendants awaiting placement at Oregon State Hospital. Instead, they could be treated in the community. We've heard a narrative from our county commissioners and sheriff that locking folks up is necessary to keep our community safe. Is this really accurate? Communities all over the country have had jail beds reduced and crime rates reduced alongside it. It isn't necessarily a direct correlation, but it's happened. The idea that more jail beds means more safety is patently false. It is a reassuring oversimplification with dire consequences. Let's work on healing our communities, making them truly safe. Please join us in opposing the jail levy, Measure 2340. Thank you.
Thank you both for those opening statements and descriptions of your positions on this issue. We're going to move now into a time of questions, and some of the questions may relate to things that were already brought up that might be worth talking about in a little bit further detail. We're also not going to have a strict, 1 minute per response kind of thing. We'll kind of take it a little organically and just allow time for conversation and exploration with our two panelists here. And I will direct questions to either one of them. Some may be more applicable to one or the other, but I definitely want to give both of our panelists a chance to respond to any of the questions that I bring up today. So, first question is maybe a little bit of a government 101 kind of question. Sheriff, you mentioned that the funds raised through this levy cannot be used for other things. You can't pave roads with them, for instance. But there doesn't seem to be anything to prevent sort of general fund money from being dedicated to these jail beds and these programs that you talked about. So why does it have to be a levy? Why can't it just be done through general fund dollars?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. There we go. Just had to hold it right. The reality is that Lane County was a timber county. We didn't have to collect a lot of taxes because we had timber revenue. And so our base county property tax rate in Lane County is $1.28 per thousand. If you compare that to Marion County, which has a similar sized population in a much smaller geography, they never were a timber county. Their property tax rate for base county operations is $3.03 per thousand. So if you applied that rate to Lane County, the county government would have $78 million more per year in delivering of county services. And that's just not our reality. This levy was originally passed in 2013 after then Sheriff Tom Turner had a really robust conversation with the community about the state of events. So the general fund in Lane County is not sufficient to meet the needs. The Budget Committee and the commissioners were consistently having to make really difficult decisions, particularly when we laid off 100 folks, but other county government departments also laid off folks during those times. The voters really told Tom that they wanted something to do with jail beds, and so the promises that were structured around this levy were related to providing this service. The other thing the voters said is that they wanted this annual audit to prove that it was being used properly. And I've personally talked to a lot of voters who have been in Lane County for a long time, and they remember a time way back in history. None of the commissioners are still in any position of government service now, but there was a time when a levy passed for a forest work camp, and after the levy passed, the commissioners took an equivalent amount of general fund dollars out of the sheriff's budget. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard that story from folks when I talk to them, but folks remember that. And so that's the purpose of that external annual audit, is to prove that the funds are being used the way the voters were told that they would be.
I'm glad you brought up the audit. In my professional life, I served as an auditor for the U.S. Treasury Department and the Federal Housing Finance Agency. I've read that audit, and it is one page front to back. And is it how many beds are in use? Are the 250 beds promised? Yes, they are. That's it. In terms of funding, I would argue that, like I said before, cutting out the jail funds would just be the first step. We still need public safety, and we still need wellness in our community. I would say that the money, we couldn't just say, hey, we'll take that money from there, we'll put it right here. But I would call on the county commissioners to fund a public safety, to put a public safety levy to the voters that would fund mental health care and community wellness. I think that would get us a lot farther towards achieving our aims, and I think it would save us a bunch of money.
Jacob, this question will go to you first. You just mentioned the public safety levy that you're proposing to fund these alternative services. And I want to say that in the voter's pamphlet for this levy that's on the ballot, it says the cost to the median homeowner is about $118 per year. Again, figures provided by the county. So that's a hair under $10 per month for a median household. This alternative public safety levy that you're proposing, have you crunched the numbers on that? What's that going to look like in terms of cost to the average household in Lane County per year?
We have not crunched those numbers. We don't have that information fully. We'd have to work with community members, and I'd be very eager to work with the county commissioners on the details of that. When it comes right down to it, that would be fantastic. If we could have that done through the county, and if we could have, if this jail levy doesn't pass, say, hey, there's a clear need. We just take the same amount of money and go for it that way. But going through the process of analyzing exactly the right amount would be a better way to do it.
Do you have any thing you want to say to that?
Well, I guess I do want to point out that there are ongoing efforts related specifically to providing services for mental health within our Health and Human Services Department. Many of you know the county has talked about a stabilization center. The Sheriff's Office has been in all of those committees because we recognize that we do have that need in our community. We work extensively with Health and Human Services on the forensic team, which interacts with the court system and the clients as far as restoration in the community rather than being sent to the state hospital. My jail captain was just in a conversation earlier today about providing mobile crisis response countywide that the county is, and a lot of that is state pass-through dollars, and we're going to continue to have all those conversations because we agree that those things do need to happen and that there are funding avenues. Again, whether or not they're sufficient or not, I can't say today, but there are funding avenues that are funding these services as we continue to have these conversations. And we need to continue to have these conversations. But one of the things that you heard just a moment ago is that a large portion of the jail is held with people waiting to go to the state hospital. The number is 13, somewhere in the fitness to proceed pathway, which is either waiting to go to the state hospital for an evaluation or waiting for their next court date after an evaluation. So I have to disagree, 13 isn't a large portion of the available beds.
Sheriff, historically, public safety levies in Oregon, especially those like this one that are proposing a renewal at the same rate, have done fairly well at the ballot box. And this one in particular has already been renewed once. So could getting another 5 years of this funding source locked in through this election does that also lock you into the status quo? Is it possible that the failure of a levy like this could provide a reason to institute kind of a top to bottom shake up community conversations that would not occur if it were to simply get renewed?
Yeah, and I think we've had a lot of those conversations in Lane County on a regular basis because we're still an under-resourced county even with this levy. This is a really base level of county government service. Again, as I discussed, who's actually in custody. These are folks who have engaged in person-to-person violent crimes that the courts have determined ought to stay in custody pending their day in court. So what the experience we've already been through from 08 to 12 and the reduction, it has caused us. Lane County has been so creative in knowing and seeking ways to be creative in the use of the tax dollar. I'm oftentimes just struck by how efficient local government is with the tax dollar, particularly when I talk to folks about things that I'd love to see the state government helping local governments with. And so I think we've done that work in Lane County. We continue to do that work in Lane County to figure out how to be strategic with those dollars. But the reality is this is a very base level. The idea in 13 was to get the jail stabilized and then have a conversation about other pieces of the public safety system in Lane County that are also under-resourced. And unfortunately, we continue to struggle with whether or not the community wants to provide the level of resources that we think ought to be provided for a more robust system.
Yeah, the sheriff is absolutely correct that we shouldn't just be relying on the county to provide everything for that. State needs to also, step up and help be able to provide for mental health care in our community. Right now, mentioning Oregon State Hospital, The amount of folks, waiting in, it doesn't make a lot of sense for folks who are waiting to be determined whether or not they're competent to stand trial are stuck waiting in the jail because OSH is so full. And then, they're still waiting for another couple weeks, passes the limit, they're sent back to jail, just sitting around waiting. Like, that part of it needs to be fixed too, So, but, big part of it, if we don't pass the jail levy here, is there will be a bigger sense that arresting somebody and throwing them in a cell should be reserved for the folks that are, the most immediate threat to the community. The jails and imprisoning somebody should be a scarce resource used judiciously. And that's what I think we could shoot for if we didn't have all this extra space. Right now, from what I understand, physical space-wise in the jail, there's room for 500 beds. Currently funded are less than 300, I believe, and a good chunk of that's from the levy. But that kind of money, I'd really like to see this jail levy not pass, and then another levy be sent to the voters for public safety throughout our community. Thank you.
Jacob, you've mentioned this other public safety levy that you've proposed a few times, and even under the most sort of aggressive timeline, that would likely not go to the ballot till November at the earliest. And then presumably it would take some time to get new programs up and running, new people hired, making sure checks and balances and accountability are included with those. So let's just say a year from now, right? So how do you ensure, like in the interim period before you're reaping the benefits, as it were, from those new programs? How do you ensure public safety in the community during that time, whether that's actual public safety or perceived public safety? How would you address that?
Well, the jail is still going to be open during that time. The jail is not fully funded by the jail levy. It's also funded through general funds and through state and other sort of pass-through monies. So, it's not like we're going to say, "Hey, jail stop," and just we'll finish it out from there. So that's part of the proposal for that.
Sheriff, did you have any response to that?
I guess I would just, again, talk about who's actually in custody at the jail. And we are not excessively incarcerating people in Lane County. If you take a look at jail beds per 1,000 population in Lane County, we're much less than others. I feel like I inherited a legacy of people who thought differently about things. We run programs at the Lane County Jail that most counties don't have when it comes to sheriff's work crew, community service as an opportunity to serve your sentence, our pretrial electronic monitoring program, which we doubled during COVID. And so while I would love to live in a land where none of that was necessary, I also believe that the reality is human beings, unfortunately, have done violence to each other for maybe since the second generation of human beings. And so at some level, there has to be some accountability to that. We also recognize that people come into our area and commit crime, that if this was a county delivery of services that would allow that nobody would ever commit crime in Lane County, we would have to exclude anybody from ever coming to Lane County that wasn't taking advantages of the programs beforehand. I mean, I think that these sorts of programs to help people avoid that path, I'm 100% behind. I belong to a bunch of organizations that invest in youth to try to keep them from a path of criminality. But that's generational work, that's lengthy work, and in the meantime, we have to have a functional system. And the reality is that before the levy, the constant capacity-based release caused the whole system to be inefficient. People didn't show up for court. The judge would enter a failed to appear warrant. They would get arrested again. They wouldn't show up for court. Very, very inefficient use of dollars. And so at some level, we have to have a base level of service for public safety, and that's what this levy asks the community to continue to support.
Do you mind if I finish my thought?
Certainly.
Sorry, I also forgot to mention that some of the crucial differences between now and 2012 are the differences passed by Measure 111 and the cash bail reforms passed by the state legislature last year. We don't have the same situation as we did 10 years ago. So using the same answers to address the same problem You know, it doesn't make sense. Thank you.
So next question is maybe getting back to the how government works category. So I'll direct this to you first, Sheriff. You mentioned the number 291 as of 11 o'clock this morning and the different sort of categories that they lie in. Obviously, there's a lot of different ways you could divide up that 291 with different categories. One of those would be geography. Lane County is a big place, more than 100 miles from east to west, but yet I would imagine that the majority of people currently in the Lane County Jail may be from Eugene, Springfield area, Cottage Grove, some of the more populated parts of the central county. Yet people all over the county will pay the same rate for this levy. How is that kind of fair? How do you sort of convince folks who may live in the outlying areas and don't see the sheriff's deputies around very often that they need to pay at the same rate as somebody who lives in a populated area?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. It's sort of, I mentioned this is my 26th community presentation. I've done a bunch of them out in unincorporated Lane County, and they always talk about patrol and the fact that they don't see patrol cars. And they're right, they don't. If you wanted to compare us to an average sheriff's office with respect to patrol on a per thousand population basis, we'd need 75 more patrol deputies. So again, we're an under-resourced county government, and we have been for quite a while. I still believe, though, that no matter where you're at in Lane County, we are part of a community. We're part of an organization that is together to provide services for the good of the community. And so if you live up the McKenzie Highway and your neighbor is murdered or there's a Measure 11 offense of some sort, the folks who live up there, they also are offended when someone is not held accountable. As an example, in 2012, was personally involved in investigating a homicide that was just outside of Oak Ridge. An individual bludgeoned another individual to death with a chunk of firewood. And because we only had 125 beds and because we have other folks that we're statutorily required to keep, that person was pretrial released as a forced release. The court wanted us to hang on to him, but there wasn't room. Everybody has a score. Our pretrial release officers, they interview everybody that comes in. There's a risk assessment tool that is used. The U of O validates it periodically. At any rate, this individual that bludgeoned another man to death with a chunk of firewood was forced release because he had the lowest score that day. And I'll tell you that the community of Oak Ridge found that alarming because he had killed someone in their community, and they found that alarming. So regardless of where you live in the county, residents want a functional public safety system, whether you're in downtown Eugene or not. Citizens of Eugene in general they certainly do use more of the beds in Lane County. However, the folks who receive sheriff's patrols on Row River Road outside of Cottage Grove, they pay the same $1.28 per thousand as the downtown Eugene resident pays. The downtown Eugene resident also is paying for the Eugene Police Department, which provides the bulk of their policing needs, unlike the person who lives on Row River. Now, there are other aspects of the sheriff that are specifically countywide, for example, serving court protective orders. It doesn't matter if you're on Row River Road or downtown Eugene. If a loved one gets a protected or restraining order against someone for a domestic situation, that's a sheriff's deputy that goes to the address in downtown Eugene to serve it, same as Row River. So there's a number of aspects of the sheriff's office that are truly countywide. And then, of course, residents of Eugene recreate up Row River. They go up to Wildwood Falls. And so I think it's still appropriate to have a county level of service that provides for the members that live in the county, regardless of whether they're in a city or in the county.
With regards to the fellow who murdered his friend with a piece of firewood and was released under capacity bearers release, I looked up the records for him, and he came right on back, and he got sentenced to 6 years in prison. Didn't reoffend in the community after the point where, while drunk, he killed his friend, an argument around a campfire. But your point about how we need to make the community whole is really important. Because when it comes to just locking somebody away, that takes care of it sort of immediately, but that still doesn't mean the community's been made whole. There's a family who doesn't have if somebody's murdered, they don't have anybody, they don't have that person anymore, and you're going to need with under a more sort of restorative justice style of engaging with the community, you talk with them, find out what their needs are, and see what you can do to make the community better again. Just locking somebody away isn't going to do it. And again, this guy released under capacity-based release, he came right on back and was then sentenced to prison. To me, that almost feels like a success story for capacity-based release.
So quick time check, we have 5 to 8 more minutes, and so we'll take that in mind as we move through these next couple of questions. And Jacob, I'm glad you mentioned restorative justice. I was going to ask you about that, and I know sort of that might have a different kind of look to it for every situation, but could you describe for us a little bit what that looks like for, like, let's say a domestic violence victim or somebody who was held up in their shop at gunpoint, or obviously there are many other scenarios. What would that look like?
Sure. Well, I'm not an expert on that side of things. I'm an accountant by trade, and so I'm a little more used to the numbers. But from my understanding of things are that under restorative justice, what you do is like you go and you see the person who did the harm, and the person who got harmed, and then you sit them down with their community and talk out what needs to be done to make things better. It isn't just sort of a one-size-fits-all, take them, put them in a jail, and give them a set amount of prison, a set amount of time sitting in jail, and that'll sort of fix things. Frequently, when you take somebody and just put them in jail and take them out of the situation, when they eventually do get out, how do they reincorporate? If we spent that time instead to sit folks down and talk things over, I think that'd get us in better stead. But again, I'm not an expert on restorative justice individually, so the folks more versed than I may be able to explain it better, but that's my understanding.
Sheriff, do you have any experience with restorative justice, or how would you address that?
Yeah, we've got an organization in town called the Center for Dialogue and Resolution, and I've met with them a couple of times and even had some really great conversations about how we could potentially use them within our organization. Occasionally we have personnel issues and those sorts of things. The DA's office interacts with them, the public defenders are familiar with them, and they are engaged in resolving court cases here in Lane County from time to time. So they are a great resource, not a resource that I think works for everything. You gave a couple of good examples, Chris. I sometimes, I hate to share this, but it's been a large part of my career. And if you talk about a sex abuse case or something like that, where a child's been inappropriately touched, rather, I should say. I was our detective sergeant for a while, and I read every one of those referrals. And as a father, I would find it really hard to participate in that sort of resolution to the case. I can't fathom that.
One of the things that stood out to me in the description of this levy is the statistic that it provides 78% of the cost of mental health services provided within the jail. Mental health clearly is something that is universally agreed as being, important to address, and there's a lot of different ways you can go about that. How do you see the best case? What would it look like if funds were not an issue? What would mental health services in the public safety context look like to you? Sheriff, please go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. If funding wasn't an issue, a stabilization center like has been facilitated in other places and is in the works here in Lane County, I think would do a lot for what, again, I think there's a misperception most of the folks in jail are, and it's not quite true, but when a business owner, their business is disrupted by an individual who's unhoused and maybe in mental health crisis, to be able to have a place to take them that isn't the jail and isn't the ER, I think would be very, very beneficial to our community. But again, the majority of the folks that are in our custody are felony person crimes, and so that's not the majority of what's in the jail. The reason it's 78% of the cost is covered by the levy. So we mentioned 52% of the overall corrections budget is levy funded. But again, the voters said specifically when they passed this, it was about jail beds. 78% of our jail beds are paid for with the levy. So the big umbrella of the corrections division, that includes sheriff's work crew, electronic monitoring, some of the things that case law we're required to have. We call them population management team. We have to monitor people's behavior. We have to have a classification system so we can protect some from others, etc. None of those costs can be paid for with the levy. So that's the big umbrella, 52%. 78% of the beds are paid for with the levy. Therefore, 78% of our medical bill, we pay for with the levy. 78% of the mental health costs, we pay for with the levy. 78% of our toilet paper costs, we pay for with the levy. So that's why it's 78%. And if we didn't have the levy, we wouldn't have those 5 mental health specialists. We would have to go back to, with what few beds we did keep open, we would have to go back to bad behavior that we can't control means we have to keep you locked in your room more often. And we know through our experience in this program that we are taking better care of the people in our custody by having that. I would love to say we're giving them the skills to never return. Jacob talked about this a little bit. Sometimes we find that when their charges are dismissed or they're released from our custody, if they're not on the way to prison, we would love to find a place within the community for them to be housed that still has a lot of structure around it to help them stay on the right course and maybe a step down process. So again, if we had unlimited money, there would be much more of that resource out there also.
Yeah, precisely what the sheriff was talking about at the end there. That's what we'd like to see a lot more of, and the money, going right now to put folks in jail. If we could put it towards that instead, I think we'd be served in much better stead.
I mean, you're saying, instead, there is a world in which you could, in theory, pass this levy and then have that sort of other levy that you're talking about. Is it just a matter of, you don't think voters will approve both, or are you so fundamentally opposed to sort of the current structure that the only path forward that you see is to reject the levy?
Well, I do oppose the levy categorically, but we'd be much better served if a further levy to fund public safety efforts, mental health care treatment, that sort of thing, was passed afterwards. So, but as it stands, also, I don't think a clearer message could be sent to the county commissioners that there's not hunger for just jail funding, but for something else in the community than to say no. These don't exist in a vacuum. So that's a big part of what we're pushing for.
Yeah. Sheriff, you mentioned the 26 community presentations that you've done. I imagine you probably have a few more in forums like this. Jacob, I'm sure you've been out in the community talking to people as well. And I'm sure you're both getting a lot of opinions on this and about public safety topics in general. I was wondering if you could both kind of summarize maybe some of the themes that you're hearing, and maybe in a way that doesn't just say they support my point of view. Like, so yeah, either one of you, if you have the mic, go ahead.
I suppose I don't know how to answer that if I'm not trying to push my side of things too. But public safety is really important to our entire community. No matter which way we slice it, and folks just want to be safe in their communities. And yeah, I mean, when I was growing up, take the bad guys, you put them in jail. That's how you solve things. But just looking at the data and okay, I was about to go back into my pitch again. But, the key thing is that public safety is really important to everybody in our community. And I think the sheriff and I can definitely agree on that side of things, even if we see different avenues. But there's a lot of overlap, too, in what we're doing. A lot of the things that the jail provides is beneficial to the community. But is it the most effective and efficient way of providing it? And does it make the community whole fully? I don't think so. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say every one of the conversations has been a robust conversation about public safety in Lane County, and most of the folks who show up are the sort of folks that intend to be educated about these things. So oftentimes they know Lane County's history, they understand that we're resource constrained. Lots of them remember what it looked like 10 years ago when we were, capacity-based releasing 4,000 people a year. They remember what that looked like, and they remember the conversations that happened. And so, I would say it's been terrific. I love an opportunity to get to visit with the community. I always wish that even more would come because we have nearly 400,000 folks in the county, and I love to engage with folks who are desiring to be educated about their community, and that usually means they're also investing. They're giving their time not just to be there for the conversation, but somewhere they're serving. And so it's a terrific opportunity to get to visit with the community, and every one of them has been a terrific conversation, and I would say largely with folks who understand the needs.
Okay, Lane County Sheriff Cliff Harold and Jacob True of Healing Not Handcuffs, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris Lehman from KLCC, for moderating today's discussion of the renewal of this levy that is a decision for Lane County voters coming up in May. I also want to just add a thought as we are continuing these conversations in community. A few years ago, I learned a fascinating statistic from our Oregon Department of Employment, which was that 19 of 20 people in Lane County, in terms of our population change in here, are in migration population change, meaning one person is born in Lane County out of those 20, and 19 of those people, in terms of our population, are people who are coming into our county as a part of that population change. I mention it only because when we are talking about some of the many decades decisions that have been made in our community and the influence of those decisions or of the perceptions we may have based on previous history, it's important to remember that not all of us have shared that history, not all of us know those stories, and I want to thank both of our speakers today for the educating points that you offered. I learned a lot about county funding, about our tax structure, about perceptions of that structure versus reality, and about aspirations that we have for the future. So thank you very much. My name is Karen Knutson. I'm City Club's president. It's been my delight to welcome you all to this forum today. Before we wrap up, I want to offer a special thank and acknowledgement of City Club volunteers who make our programs possible, and also to City Club's in-kind sponsors, KRVM 91.9 Radio, Pack Info and Simplified Computing, LLC, and Dotson's Photography. Also, a special thank you to our award-winning public radio station, KLCC FM 89.7, for airing City Club programs on Mondays at 7 p.m. For those who are listening at home right now, your household is one of several thousands who have tuned in to City Club on KLCC, and we love that you are here. You can also find all recent City Club programs archived on KLCC, as well as our YouTube channel and as podcasts. And because I just mentioned our podcasts and the many different ways that you can find City Club, it's the perfect moment to thank another wonderful member of our volunteer team, Board Member Marilyn Milne, who is an inspiring part of our leadership team at the City Club of Eugene and who supports the communications and audio production of our programs every week. She helps us to make sure that these conversations are shared broadly through many accessible formats, and we are so grateful for her work. Thank you, Marilyn. Next week, we have two exciting opportunities for you to connect with City Club. On Thursday, April 20th, we invite you to join us in celebrating volunteers during National Volunteer Week. On the 20th, from 4:30 to 6 p.m., City Club will be gathering at the Tap and Growler just north of Fifth Street Market to toast the volunteers who make these programs possible, and we would love for you to come by and say hello. So if you're in the neighborhood, you're in the community, we would love to see you there and hear about how you are volunteering and thinking about the ways in which you might contribute to our community conversations. And then on Friday, April 21st, we can continue that conversation and talk more as City Club welcomes Lane Transit District General Manager Jamison T. Otten for a program learning about LTD's current and future plans. Jamison has been with LTD for several months now, but he is our Transit District's new GM. And if you have questions about transit, transportation, micromobility, like those scooters you've heard so much about, equity, affordability, and community vision, we invite you to this conversation and to ask Jamison some questions. I'm sure that he would love to meet you and to answer them. And with that, thank you again to our speakers today, to our guest moderator, Chris Lehman from KLCC. Thank you all for joining us at the City Club of Eugene. Take care, and we will see you soon.